The humidity in the Florida Everglades didn't just sit on the skin. It invaded the pores, a heavy, wet blanket that smelled of ancient decay and aggressive rebirth. From 500 feet in the air, however, the sweltering oppression was reduced to a breathtaking tapestry of emerald and bruised violet. Dr. Elena Vance pressed her forehead against the cool plexiglass of the Sikorsky S-76 helicopter, her breath fogging the view of the river of grass. Below, the sawgrass prairies stretched out like a vast, flat ocean, broken only by the dark, tangled islands of hardwood hammocks. It was a landscape that defied civilization, a prehistoric lung that breathed for the entire state. And yet, there she was, flying toward the most technologically advanced anomaly in the entire wetlands. Impressive, isn't it? The voice crackled through her noise-canceling headset, smooth and practiced. It belonged to the pilot, a man who had introduced himself only as Jenkins and who wore a uniform crisp enough to cut glass. "It's vast," Elena replied, her voice sounding tinny in her own ears. "I've done field work in the Amazon and the Congo, but there is something about the Everglades that feels relentless. Wait until you see the destination, Doctor. Mr. Thorne doesn't do things by halves." Elena adjusted the strap of her seatbelt, her fingers brushing against the leather folder resting on her lap. Inside were the non-disclosure agreements, the terrifyingly lucrative contract, and the sparse briefing dossier on Eden Glades. She was an ethologist, a specialist in predator behavior and rehabilitation. Thorne was an enigma wrapped in a tuxedo, a biotech mogul who had suddenly pivoted to conservation with the zeal of a religious convert. He hadn't just hired her. He had acquired her professional curiosity with a salary that could fund a small university. "Coming up on the perimeter now," Jenkins announced. The helicopter banked sharply. The endless monotony of the sawgrass was suddenly severed by a geometric scar. A wall. It was a massive structure, rising perhaps 20 feet out of the swamp, constructed of matte black composite that seemed to swallow the sunlight. It cut a perfect square into the wilderness miles wide. "Is that electrified?" Elena asked, squinting at the faint hum she imagined she could hear over the rotors. "Top-grade perimeter defense," Jenkins said casually. "Keeps the wildlife in and the poachers out. We're entering airspace now." As they crossed the black threshold, the world below transformed. If the outside was wild chaos, the inside was curated paradise. The water here sparkled with an unnatural clarity. The tree islands were manicured, connected by sleek, suspended walkways made of glass and steel that hovered above the water like spiderwebs. In the center of the compound rose the primary facility, a sprawling architectural marvel of white concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass, shaped like a blooming lotus flower. Eden Gilded, Elena Vispirit. It looked less like a sanctuary and more like a Bond villain's lair repurposed by Apple. The helicopter descended toward a rooftop helipad marked with a stylized E in gold paint. The downdraft whipped the ornamental palms planted in rooftop gardens into a frenzy. Elena unbuckled and stepped out, expecting the blast of humid heat. Instead, she was hit by a gentle, cool breeze. She looked around, confused, until she noticed the misting systems discreetly embedded in the helipad railing, pumping out chilled, jasmine-scented vapor. "Dr. Vance, welcome to paradise." The man striding toward her was undeniably Marcus Thorne. He looked exactly like his magazine covers, tall, with salt and pepper hair swept back from a face that was handsome in a predatory, aquiline way. He wore a cream-colored linen suit that showed no sign of wrinkling, and his smile was bright enough to trigger a migraine. "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, extending a hand. He bypassed it and gripped her shoulders warmly, a move that felt both welcoming and possessive. "Marcus, please. Mr. Thorne is my father, and he's been dead for 20 years. I'm so glad you're finally here. The digital meetings didn't do you justice." "The facility is overwhelming," Elena said, shouting slightly over the dying whine of the turbine. "It's necessary," Thorne said, guiding her toward a glass elevator that jutted out from the side of the building. "Conservation has been reactive for too long. Elena. Scrapping for pennies, bandaging wounds. I wanted to build something proactive. Something permanent. They stepped into the elevator. Thorne tapped a panel, and the doors slid shut with a hiss of pressurized air. As they descended, the view opened up to the central atrium of the main building. It was a cathedral of science. You have a waterfall inside, Elena noted dryly. Circulates the air, regulates humidity, and provides white noise for the staff. Psychology is as important as biology here, Thorne said. The elevator deposited them into a lobby that smelled of espresso and ozone. But as Elena stepped out, her eyes were drawn not to the modern art on the walls or the sleek reception desk, but to the men standing by the main entrance. There were two of them. They weren't wearing the khaki uniform of park rangers. They wore tactical gray fatigues, ceramic body armor, and drop-leg holsters housing large-caliber sidearms. They stood with the relaxed but alert posture of men who had seen combat. Elena slowed her pace. I wasn't aware the poaching threat in the Everglades warranted a paramilitary response. Thorne didn't break stride, though his smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. We house some of the rarest genetic sequences on the planet, Elena. Not just local fauna. We have breeding pairs here that are worth millions on the black market. The ghost panther, the Sumatran rhino. Security is robust. Robust, repeated. Those aren't security guards, Marcus. That's a private military contractor stance. We call them the Asset Protection Unit. APU, Thorne said, waving a hand dismissively. But you didn't come here to discuss logistics. You came to see the residents. Thorne stopped in front of a heavy steel door. He turned to her, his expression shifting from charismatic host to serious scientist. He placed his palm against the scanner. The light turned green, and the heavy door hissed open. They stepped onto a suspended observation walkway, enclosed in 2-inch thick glass. Below them lay Sector 4. It was a masterful recreation of a dense cypress swamp, but cleaner, brighter. And there, pacing the perimeter of the enclosure, was the animal. It was a Florida panther, but unlike any Elena had ever seen. It was massive, easily 30 pounds heavier than the average male. Its coat was a rich, tawny gold that seemed to shimmer, and its muscles rippled with a terrifying density. It didn't prowl, it marched. My God, Elena breathed, stepping closer to the glass. He's huge. Is that natural growth? Nutritional optimization, Thorne said quickly. We spare no expense on their diet. The panther stopped. It looked up. Its eyes were a piercing, electric amber. It locked eyes with Elena. He's watching everything, a new voice cut in. Elena turned to see a man leaning against the railing further down the walkway. He was starkly different from Thorne. Where Thorne was polished linen and charm, this man was denim and grit. He wore a gray t-shirt that strained against broad shoulders, and his dark hair was cut short, utilitarian. His face was rugged, marked by a thin scar running through his left eyebrow, and his eyes, steely blue, were currently dissecting Elena with professional suspicion. David, Thorne said, his tone dipping slightly in warmth. I didn't know you were in Sector 4. Sensors picked up a vibration anomaly near the north drain. Checked it out. Just settling sediment, the man said. Miller didn't smile. He extended a hand that was calloused and rough. Dr. Vance, I've read your file. Impressive work with the wolves in Yellowstone. Thank you, Elena said, gripping his hand. It was like gripping a rock. David is a former specialist, Thorne said vaguely. He keeps the gilded cage locked tight. I keep the staff alive, Miller corrected flatly. He looked past Elena, through the glass, down at the massive panther. Subject 7 Alpha is agitated today. He's been testing the perimeter fencing in the northwest quadrant, touching it, taking the shock, and waiting to see how long it takes for the recharge cycle. He's learning the timing. Elena looked back at the panther. That's high-level problem-solving, beyond typical feline cognition. Her quarters were located in the East Wing, a section of the complex cantilevered over a natural lagoon. The room was more of a suite, with polished bamboo floors, high thread count linens, and a wall of glass that looked out over the darkening wetlands. Miller had left her at the door with a key card and a curt nod. Elena tossed her bag onto the bed and walked to the window. The sun was setting, bleeding crimson and burnt orange across the horizon. The beauty of the Everglades was undeniable, but the context had shifted. She unpacked slowly, her mind racing. Thorne's enthusiasm was infectious, but Miller's grim warnings acted as a potent antidote. She sat at the small desk to boot up her laptop. Outside, the sun had vanished. The swamp was a wall of blackness. A sound drifted through the glass. It wasn't the chirp of crickets or the bellow of a gator. It was a mechanical sound, a heavy, rhythmic thrumming like a generator cycling up, or a pump. Elena stood and pressed her face to the glass. Below her balcony, the dark water of the lagoon was churning. Bubbles were rising to the surface in a violent froth. Suddenly, floodlights under the water flicked on, turning the lagoon into a glowing turquoise pool. Elena gasped and stepped back. In the illuminated water, shapes were moving. Not fish, not gators. They were humanoid, but wrong. They moved with jerky, synchronized precision. Divers? No, they were too small. She grabbed a pair of binoculars from her field bag and focused them. They were monkeys. Macaques, perhaps? They were swimming underwater, tethered to the bottom of the lagoon by long, clear tubes attached to masks covering their faces. They were working on something. A grate? A valve? What the hell? She whispered. She watched as one of the monkeys finished its task, unlatched the tether, and shot to the surface. It scrambled up the pylon of the walkway, moving with a speed that blurred in the low light. It shook itself dry, and for a split second, the light from her window caught its face. One, I was biological, reflecting the light. The other was a red LED, glowing softly in the dark fur. Elena lowered the binoculars, her breath catching in her throat. A chime at her door made her jump. Dr. Vance? Thorne's voice came through the intercom. Dinner is served in the atrium. I hope you're hungry. Elena looked back at the lagoon. The lights had cut out. The water was black and still again. The monkeys, the things, were gone. Coming, she called out, her voice trembling slightly. She smoothed her blouse, checked her reflection in the mirror, and saw the fear in her own eyes. She took a deep breath, forcing the mask of professional detachment back into place. Paradise had been found, indeed, but as she unlocked the door, Elena Vance had the sinking realization that the serpent wasn't in the garden. The serpent was the garden. She stepped out into the hallway, walking deeper into the cage. The humidity in the Florida Everglades didn't just exist, it possessed weight. It was a physical entity that pressed against the reinforced glass of the sanctuary's administrative wing, a heavy, wet hand trying to smudge out the antiseptic perfection of Marcus Thorne's empire. Dr. Elena Vance sat at a desk made of reclaimed mahogany. The surface so polished it reflected the dark circles beginning to form under her eyes. It was day 3 of her residency at the sanctuary. Officially, she was here as a zoological auditor. Unofficially, she was here to prove that she hadn't lost her edge after the incident in San Diego. And the math was wrong. Elena rubbed her temples. She had been cross-referencing the dietary shipments from the mainland against the consumption logs of the registered species. 600 pounds, she whispered to the empty office. The Florida Panthers' metabolic requirement wouldn't dent this shipment. Something was bigger. The West Deck was a sensory overload of wealth disguised as altruism. She spotted Marcus Thorne near the railing, holding court. He was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him, tall, tanned, with silver fox hair and a smile that had graced the cover of Time magazine. The key isn't just preservation, Thorne was saying. It's integration. I noticed some discrepancies in the nutrition logs, Elena said. A substantial surplus of high-protein red meat. Elk specifically. Thorne didn't blink. He took a sip of his whiskey. You have a sharp eye. That would be for the VIP program. Very important predators. We occasionally host transiting animals. Tigers in transit last week. Elena nearly collided with a man who was out of place. He wore a rumpled field jacket and had a face that looked like it had seen more wind than facials. David Miller, wildlife photography, he said. Thorne is a master of shell game, Dr. Vance. If he says it was tigers, it wasn't tigers. I've observed that the service road to the north sector has fresh tire tracks. Heavy ones. The north sector was labeled as reclamation zone. At 2:45 a.m., Elena slipped out. She reached the junction. A heavy chain-link gate blocked the path. She climbed over the railing, her feet hovering inches above the dark surface. Two glowing red eyes reflected in the moonlight, resting on the water's surface 10 feet away. Just passing through, she breathed. A matte black semi, unmarked, backed up to the hangar. Marcus Thorne stepped out, looking agitated. "You're late," he snapped. "We have a new auditor on site." Two men in tactical gear unlatched the heavy doors. A fog of condensed air rolled out. They activated a hydraulic lift. A crate emerged. Massive, reinforced steel. From inside the steel box came a sound that vibrated through the metal grating. It wasn't a roar. It was a chuff, a low, resonant exhalation. The second crate shook violently. "Hit it again," Thorne ordered. One of the tactical men jammed a cattle prod through a ventilation slot. A snarl ripped through the air, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She crept back toward the fence, her limbs stiff. As she reached the perimeter of the guest lodge, she saw a figure standing on the balcony above her suite. The figure struck a match. It was David Miller. He was leaning against the railing, smoking a cigarette, looking directly down at the spot where she was hiding in the bushes. She rushed to her laptop. Her phone was acting sluggish. A message popped up on her screen. "System alert. Unauthorized device detected. Action. Device quarantined." By bringing her phone near the hangar, she had tripped a digital tripwire. She opened her physical notebook. "The ledger is a ghost," she wrote. "But the monsters are real." The humidity in the Florida Everglades didn't just hang in the air. It hunted you. It pressed against the glass of the veranda doors, a physical weight seeking entry into the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the suite. Elena Vance sat cross-legged on the plush carpet of her room at the Elysium Glades Resort, the light from her laptop screen carving harsh shadows into the hollows of her cheeks. It was 2:14 a.m. The luxury eco-resort, Marcus Thorne's crowning jewel of philanthropy and excess, was finally asleep. But the swamp outside was wide awake. Through the double-pane glass, she could hear the rhythmic, prehistoric chorus of cicadas and bullfrogs, a wall of sound that masked 1,000 secrets. The progress bar hit 100%. A soft chime echoed. Keycard clone complete. Elena exhaled, a sharp release of tension that she hadn't realized she was holding. She unhooked the magnetic writer from the USB port and swiped a blank white card through it. The writer buzzed once. She now held the master key to the kingdom, or, more likely, the key to the dungeon. She stood up, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent the last decade breaking into places she wasn't welcome. She swapped her silk dinner blouse for black tactical cargo pants and a moisture-wicking long-sleeve shirt. The Everglades were unforgiving. Bare skin was an invitation for mosquitoes, sawgrass, and worse. Elena slipped out the balcony door. The heat hit her instantly, a wet, suffocating blanket that smelled of ozone, decaying vegetation, and expensive jasmine landscaping. She vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet to the soft, mulched earth below. She landed in a crouch, freezing instantly, waiting for the sweep of a security camera or the crunch of boots on gravel. The architecture of the Elysium Glades was designed to guide the eye toward beauty and away from function. The guest pathways were lit by amber LEDs that mimicked fireflies, winding through manicured gardens of orchids and bromeliads. But Elena wasn't following the guest paths. She cut through the landscaping, pushing through dense ferns that wetted her sleeves with dew, heading toward the service perimeter. She dove for the crates, sliding into the narrow gap between the wood and the concrete wall of a generator shed just as the beams of flashlights cut through the humid darkness. The guards weren't the resort's smiling, polo shirt-wearing staff. These men wore tactical vests, combat boots, and carried assault rifles slung casually across their chests. Private military contractors. High grade. Expensive. "Did you hear that?" one guard asked. His voice was gravelly, bored but alert. "Hear what? It's a swamp, man. Everything makes noise. Elena stopped breathing. She pressed herself into the concrete, willing her heartbeat to slow. Zone 4 was a scar on a landscape. Massive, windowless warehouses rose out of the swamp like monoliths, connected by a labyrinth of above-ground pipes that hissed and groaned with pressurized fluids. She reached a steel door marked Quarantine, Level 4 authorization only. She swiped the card again. Green light. The door hissed open, revealing an airlock. Elena stepped inside. The airlock cycled, blasts of decontamination mist spraying from the ceiling. When the inner door opened, the temperature plummeted 30 degrees. She stepped into a corridor that looked like it belonged on a space station. White floors, white walls, blinding LED strips overhead. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of high-powered air filtration. She moved down the corridor, passing glass-walled rooms. The first was empty. The second contained rows of centrifuges spinning silently. The third, Elena stopped. She pressed her hand against the glass, her breath catching in her throat. It's a nursery. Inside the room, incubated in clear, nutrient-rich tanks, were eggs. But not bird eggs. These were leathery, oblong, and pulsing with internal light. And in the larger tanks, she saw a creature floating in suspension fluid. It looked like a panther, but the proportions were wrong. The muscle mass was grotesque, the claws serrated like obsidian knives, and protruding from its spine were armored plates that shimmered with an iridescent, oily sheen. The space opened up into a cavernous warehouse. The air reeked of musk and raw meat. Below her, stretching for 100 yards, were cages. And inside them, the nightmares were awake. Who's there? The voice didn't come from the cages. It came from the far end of the catwalk. Marcus Thorne stood on the platform, flanked by two of the armed mercenaries. He was wearing a white lab coat over his tuxedo, a glass of scotch in one hand. He looked impeccable, untroubled, and utterly terrifying. "I know someone is there," Thorne said, his voice smooth, amplified by the acoustics of the hangar. "The sensors on the airlock don't lie. You have 5 seconds to show yourself before I release the hounds." Elena's eyes locked on a large red button under a plastic safety cover. Halon discharge. Emergency only. Halon gas sucked the oxygen out of a room to kill a fire. Elena smashed the plastic cover with the butt of her flashlight and slammed her palm down on the button. Whoosh. A siren wailed, ears splitting and frantic. Massive nozzles in the ceiling erupted, dumping a thick, white fog into the hangar. The sound of the gas discharging was like a jet engine taking off. "Secure the door," Thorne shouted, his voice muffled by the sudden chaos. Elena didn't wait. She scrambled over the railing of the catwalk, dropping onto the top of a stack of supply crates 10 feet below. She scrambled toward it, her fingers fumbling with the rusted latch. Elena kicked the hatch open. A blast of fetid, swamp-rot air hit her face. She slid down a concrete chute, slimy with algae, picking up speed. The darkness was total. She hit water, tepid, foul-smelling water, and went under. Something splashed behind her. Elena froze. She swept the light back up the tunnel. The water rippled 20 feet away. A V-shaped wake was moving toward her. "Fast!" "Oh God," Elena whispered. She turned and ran. The water dragged at her legs, heavy and resistant. She could hear the thing behind her now, a wet, slithering sound mixed with a low, clicking hiss. It wasn't just swimming, it was hunting. The creature launched itself from the water. Elena felt the wind of its movement. She threw herself flat against the grate just as massive jaws snapped shut. Elena smashed the magnetic rider against the rusted hinge. The hinge gave. She tumbled out into the open air. An engine roared to life. A spotlight blinded her. "Elena, grab the hand." Agent Miller was there, leaning over the side of a sleek, black fan boat. He extended an arm. She lunged, grabbing his wrist. He hauled her up onto the deck of the boat. "Go," she yelled. Miller slammed the throttle forward. The boat lurched, skimming over the water and sawgrass, tearing away from the facility. Elena reached in her pocket. Her fingers brushed the cool plastic of the clone key card and the micro camera. "I got them," she said, her voice raspy but triumphant. She looked back toward the receding glow of the Elysium Glades. But she knew the rot that lay beneath it now. As the fan boat disappeared into the labyrinth of the swamp, a drone buzzed high overhead, its camera lens rotating, locking onto their heat signature. In the control room of Zone 4, Marcus Thorne watched the screen. He took another sip of his scotch, his hand steady. "Let them run," he said to the empty room. "It's better sport that way." The humidity of the Florida Everglades did not simply exist. It possessed. It was a physical weight, a wet, suffocating blanket of black velvet that pressed against Elena Vance's skin, turning the simple act of breathing into a labor. Here, deep within the restricted perimeter of Zone 4, the air tasted of ancient rot, blooming night jasmine, and the metallic tang of ozone. Elena crouched low in the sawgrass, the sharp edges of the blades biting into her palms. The mud beneath her boots was a living thing, squelching softly, threatening to pull her down into the primordial soup that served as the foundation for Marcus Thorne's empire. She checked her watch, shielding the faint luminescence with a mud-streaked hand. 11:42 p.m. Agent David Miller's voice echoed in her memory, a ghostly transmission from their last secure call 3 hours ago. "Don't push it, Elle. We need probable cause, not a martyr. If Zone 4 is what the ledger implies, it's going to be crawling with private military. Just get eyes on the perimeter and pull back." Elena wiped a mixture of sweat and mosquito repellent from her brow. David was a good man, a by-the-book Fed who believed in warrants and tactical teams. But David hadn't seen the ghost ledger. He hadn't traced the horrifying arithmetic of endangered species moving through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He didn't know that probable cause would be too late for whatever was arriving tonight. She adjusted the strap of her high-definition DSLR, feeling the reassuring weight of the telephoto lens. The sanctuary, Thorne's Eden, lay 2 miles back, a glimmering facade of ecotourism and conservation theater. But this was the backstage. Zone 4 was supposed to be a quarantine sector for sick animals. That was the lie sold to the zoning board. What lay before her, cutting through the chaotic tangle of mangroves and cypress knees, was a road. It wasn't a dirt track, but a paved, single-lane strip of asphalt, impossibly smooth, swallowed by the canopy. She moved. Every step was a calculated risk. The cacophony of the swamp was deafening, a symphony of bullfrogs, crickets, and the distant, guttural bellows of alligators. But that noise was her cover. She synced her movements with the rhythm of the wild, freezing when the wind died down, advancing when the canopy rustled. The road ended abruptly at a limestone ridge, a geological anomaly in the flat wetlands. Artificial floodlights, mounted high on camouflage poles, bathed the area in a harsh, sterile white light that bleached the color from the surrounding jungle. Elena dropped to her stomach, crawling through the underbrush until she reached the edge of the clearing. Her breath hitched. There was no quarantine facility. There were no veterinary sheds. Instead, the limestone ridge had been bored out. A massive hydraulic door, disguised with faux rock and hanging vines, stood open like the maw of a great industrial beast. A ramp descended into the earth, the concrete throat of the bunker illuminated by amber caution lights. "My God," she whispered, the sound barely escaping her lips. It was a loading dock, subterranean, invisible to satellites, invisible to tourists. A sleek black Range Rover with tinted windows sat idling at the top of the ramp. 2 men in tactical gear, carrying carbines that were decidedly illegal for civilian security, stood by the vehicle, scanning the tree line. Their posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of predators who believed they were at the top of the food chain. Elena needed a better angle. If she filmed from here, she'd get the car and the guards, but not the transaction. She needed to see what was inside. To her right, a drainage culvert ran parallel to the ramp. It was choked with weeds and likely infested with water moccasins, but offered a shadow-drenched path down toward the open maw of the bunker. She didn't let herself think about the snakes. She thought about the ledger. She thought about the Sumatran rhino listed as deceased due to illness 2 months ago, a week before a mysterious private buyer in Riyadh acquired a new centerpiece for his collection. Elena slid into the culvert. The water was tepid and smelled of sulfur. She kept her camera held high, inching forward on her elbows and knees, the muck soaking through her cargo pants. She moved like a phantom, the adrenaline flooding her system, sharpening her senses to a razor's edge. She reached the end of the culvert, which spilled out into a grate just inside the bunker's entrance. Through the rusted bars of the drainage grate, she had a front-row seat to the underground staging area. The contrast was jarring. Above, the wild, chaotic Everglades. Below, a cathedral of polished concrete and stainless steel. The air conditioning hummed with a low, powerful thrum, banishing the humidity and replacing the swamp wrought with the scent of antiseptic and expensive leather. The space was vast, lined with high-tech containment units. This wasn't a cage. It was a showroom. Marcus Thorne walked into the frame. Seeing him in person, in his element, was different than seeing him on the glossy brochures of the sanctuary. He was a man of impeccably curated aesthetics. He wore a linen suit the color of oatmeal, crisp and unwrinkled despite the climate, and loafers that cost more than Elena's car. His silver hair was swept back, his face tanned and handsome, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach his shark-like eyes. He was speaking to a shorter, rounder man who had just exited the Range Rover. The buyer. Elena slowly lifted her camera, pressing the lens against the gap in the grate. She dialed in the focus, the silent shutter engaging as she hit the record button. The red light blinked in the darkness of the drain. Mr. Petrov. Thorne's voice carried clearly, amplified by the acoustics of the concrete bunker. It was a smooth baritone, dripping with false warmth. I trust the drive from airfield was uneventful. The glades can be disorienting at night. Petrov, a man with a nervous energy and a heavy gold watch, wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. The heat is unbearable, Thorne, even at midnight. Let us conclude this. My pilot is on a tight schedule. Patience is the hallmark of a true connoisseur, Thorne chided gently, gesturing to the center of the room. Besides, what I have for you tonight is worth a moment of discomfort. Thorne snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the facility's depths, a forklift whirred to life. It drove forward, carrying a large, reinforced crate constructed of steel and heavy-duty plexiglass. The driver set the crate down gently in the center of the illuminated circle, then backed away. Elena zoomed in. The crate was labeled with innocuous shipping codes, but the air holes along the top told a different story. Zone 4 isn't just a location, Mr. Petrov, Thorne said, walking a slow circle around the crate, his hand trailing lovingly over the metal. It is a philosophy. The world is shrinking. The wild is dying. We are not poachers. We are archivists. We preserve the rarest beauty for those who have the means to appreciate it. The specimen? Petrov asked, his voice tight with greed. Acquired from the Himalayas 3 weeks ago. A logistical nightmare, I assure you. The paperwork alone cost a fortune to forge. But the result, Thorne unlatched the front panel of the crate. With a hydraulic hiss, the side lowered, forming a ramp. Elena gasped, the sound loud in her own ears, though drowned out by the facility's hum. She almost dropped the camera. Inside the crate, lying on a bed of straw, was a creature of ethereal beauty. A snow leopard. It was immense, its thick, smoky gray fur patterned with dark rosettes. The cat was motionless, its chest rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic slumber. It was drugged heavily. The majestic predator, the ghost of the mountains, reduced to a narcotized object in a Florida basement. Male, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. Prime condition, for years old. We've administered a dosage of ketamine sufficient to keep him docile for your flight to Macau. The antidote is in the briefcase. Petrov stepped forward, his eyes wide, reflecting the harsh halogen lights. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the leopard's paw. The animal did not stir. Magnificent, Petrov breathed. And the price? The agreed sum? The agreed sum was for a female, Thorne corrected effortlessly. This is a male. Larger, more robust. The genetics are pristine. The price has been adjusted accordingly. Elena's finger was cramped on the record button. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Kidnapping a critically endangered species, international trafficking, the explicit mention of forgery. She had him. She had him cold. 5 million, Thorne said casually, as if discussing the price of a cup of coffee. Wire transfer to the usual account. Once confirmed, my team loads a crate onto your truck. Petrov hesitated, looking at the sleeping cat, then back at Thorne. 5 million. You believe me, Marcus. I provide access to the impossible, Thorne countered. Do we have a deal? Done. Elena checked the timestamp on her recording. For minutes. She had enough. She needed to get out, upload this to the cloud server she shared with David, and get a tactical team down here before that leopard was on a plane to Macau. She began to inch backward, retracting the lens. Clang. The sound was small, her belt buckle scraping against the rusted iron of the grate, but in the echoing silence following Petrov's agreement, it sounded like a gunshot. Down on the floor, 50 feet away, one of the tactical guards spun around, his weapon raising instantly. What was that? The guard barked. Elena froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stopped breathing. She became part of the darkness, praying the shadows of the culvert were deep enough. Thorne held up a hand, silencing Petrov. He looked toward the drainage wall, his eyes narrowing. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed, like a man hearing a dripping faucet. Check the vents, Thorne ordered, his voice devoid of warmth. Rats, mostly likely, but I don't pay you for assumptions. The guard moved. He walked toward the wall where the culvert emptied out, the beam of his tactical flashlight slicing through the gloom. Elena scrambled backward. Silence was no longer an option. Speed was. She crab-walked backward through the sludge, the water splashing softly. He's coming. The flashlight beam hit the grate. It swept over the bars, illuminating the tunnel for a split second. Hey, the guard shouted, his voice echoing into the pipe. Movement. Sector 3 drainage. Secure the package. Thorne's voice roared, losing its composure for the first time. Seal the doors. Find them. Elena didn't wait. She turned and scrambled onto her hands and knees, abandoning stealth. She splashed through the muck, her boots slipping on the slime-coated concrete. Behind her, she heard the metallic groan of the grate being kicked in. David, 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 she chanted internally, a panic-stricken mantra. She burst out of the culvert and back into the humid embrace of the night. She didn't stop. She scrambled up the muddy embankment, clawing at roots and vines, her camera swinging wildly around her neck. Behind her, the heavy hydraulic whine of the bunker door began to change pitch. They weren't just sealing it. They were deploying the perimeter countermeasures. A siren began to wail, a low, oscillating sound that seemed to vibrate through the swamp water. Elena hit the tree line just as the first spotlight swept the area she had occupied seconds ago. She dove behind the thick trunk of a cypress tree, pressing her back against the rough bark. Voices, shouting, the heavy thud of boots on the ramp. Fan out. Infrared sweeps. If it's a gator, shoot it. If it's a person, bring them to Thorne. Alive. Elena checked her camera. The red light was off. The file was saved. She was 2 miles from the public road. 2 miles of swamp, guarded by men with night vision and guns, and behind them, a man who would kill to keep his gilded cage closed. She looked down at the screen. The frozen image of the snow leopard stared back at her, a ghost in a box. I have you, she thought, a fierce, cold anger overriding the fear. She took a breath of the heavy, wet air, tightened her grip on the camera, and turned into the deep dark of the Everglades. The hunt had changed. She was no longer the observer. She was the prey, but prey that could bite back. Elena slipped into the sawgrass, vanishing just as the dogs began to bark. The download bar on the encrypted tablet crawled to 99%, a pixelated green worm inching toward salvation. Elena Vance held her breath, the silence of the server room pressing against her eardrums like deep water. The air was frigid here, maintained at a precise 62 degrees to protect the silicon brains of Marcus Thorne's empire. a stark, sterile contrast to the humid, rotting heat of the Florida Everglades waiting outside the reinforced walls. In the reflection of the black glass monitor, she saw herself, a shadow in tactical black, face smeared with grease paint, eyes wide and frantic. She didn't look like an investigative journalist anymore. She looked like a thief, a ghost. The bar hit 100%. Complete. Elena yanked the drive, shoving it into the waterproof pouch taped against her ribs. She had it. The ghost ledger. Every transaction from the midnight auction. Every politician bought. Every shipment of unregistered arms. And the human cargo manifest that turned her stomach to ice. It was enough to bury Marcus Thorne beneath a mountain of federal indictments. It was enough to get her killed. She turned to the heavy steel door, reaching for the handle. Click. It wasn't the sound of the latch disengaging. It was the sound of a magnetic lock slamming home with the finality of a coffin lid. The ambient blue lighting of the server room died instantly, replaced by a strobing crimson pulse. No sight in bailiff. Thorne was too sophisticated for noise. The alarm was silent, a digital scream sent directly to the headsets of the private military contractors patrolling the grounds. Damn it, Elena hissed, the sound harsh in the sudden red gloom. She tapped her earpiece. Miller? Miller, I'm burned. Zone 4 is locking down. Static hissed back, followed by the frantic voice of FBI Special Agent David Miller. The signal was choppy, fighting through the layers of concrete and the storm interference rolling in from the Gulf. Get out, Elena. Sensors just lit up the whole grid. They know exactly where you are. I'm moving the extraction point to the secondary location. The canal. Do you copy? Elena grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall mount. She didn't swing it. She wouldn't generate enough force. Instead, she jammed the metal nozzle into the corner of the pane, where the structural tension was highest, and drove her boot into the canister's base with everything she had. A spiderweb of white fractures exploded outward. She hit again, and again. The glass groaned, then surrendered, showering the floor in diamonds that sparkled red in the emergency lights. She scrambled through the jagged opening, the shards slicing into her tactical gloves. She dropped in the maintenance corridor, just as the server room door hissed open behind her. She burst through a service door and spilled out into the main kitchen. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed. Elena slid across the polished tile, knocking a rack of copper pans to the floor with a deafening clatter. She scrambled toward the rear exit, the one leading to the loading dock. She hit the loading dock doors, shoulder-checking the crash bar. They flew open, and the humidity hit her like a physical blow. The air was thick, smelling of ozone, jasmine, and swamp mud. The transition from the air-conditioned interior to the oppressive Florida night was instant and suffocating. She was out, but she wasn't free. The manicured lawn of the estate stretched out before her, 200 yards of open ground before the tree line, where the manicured reality ended and the primal swamp began. Searchlights swept the grounds from the guard towers, cutting brilliant white cones through the darkness. Elena crouched behind a stack of shipping crates. A drone whined overhead. A red laser grid scanned the ground near her, searching for a heat signature. She hit the perimeter fence. It was 10 feet high, topped with razor wire. She found the sagging section. She leaped, fingers hooking into the chain link. She hauled herself up, boots scrambling for purchase. A spotlight hit her. She was blinded, a moth pinned against the steel. Drop it! A voice screamed from the darkness behind her. She rolled, coming up covered in muck. She was in the Everglades now. The terrain changed instantly. The solid ground dissolved into a treacherous slurry of mud and root systems. The sawgrass rose around her, 6 feet high, the blade sharp enough to slice skin. Behind her, the baying of hounds began. Deep, throaty barks. Dobermans or Malinois. Fust. She slid under the massive root system of a straggler fig, pressing her back into the wet wood. In the mud next to her hand, something moved. A water moccasin, thick as her wrist, coiled sluggishly, disturbed by her heat. Its mouth opened, revealing the cotton-white interior. Elena froze. She was trapped between the venom of the snake and the malice of the men behind her. From the darkness beyond the marker, a roar erupted. It wasn't an engine. It was gunfire. Miller opened up, not with a pistol, but something heavier. Tracers zipped through the night, green streaks of fire skipping off the water. The security airboat swerved violently, its spotlight spinning wildly into the trees. "Elena, jump!" Miller's boat, a sleek, black tactical skiff, tore around the bend, its bow lifting out of the water. Elena didn't hesitate. She sprinted off the end of the mud bank and launched herself into the air. For a second, she was weightless, suspended between the swamp and salvation. Elena pulled herself up, clutching her ribs. "I got it," she said, her voice raspy. "I got the ledger." Miller nodded, his eyes returning to the dark channel ahead. "Then brace yourself, Elena. The easy part is over. Now we have to survive what's on that drive." The boat vanished into the labyrinth of the Everglades, leaving only ripples to mark its passing, quickly swallowed by the unforgiving dark. The Everglades did not end. They merely surrendered to the asphalt. Elena Vance felt the transition before she saw it. The sucking, viscous mud that had claimed her boots for the last 6 miles finally gave way to a hardened bank of limestone and gravel. She collapsed, her knees striking the earth with a hollow thud, the breath tearing from her lungs in ragged, burning gasps. Above her, the canopy of cypress and strangler figs parted, revealing a slice of sky the color of a bruised plum. Dawn was coming. The humidity wrapped around her like a wet wool blanket, smelling of decay, blooming jasmine, and the metallic tang of her own blood. She touched her temple. The gash she'd received during the scramble out of Zone 4 was sticky and hot, but the adrenaline that had fueled her flight from Thorne's estate was beginning to curdle into a trembling exhaustion. A sound cut through the chorus of waking cicadas and distant bullfrogs. It was a low, rhythmic thrum, not the roar of a jaguar or the bellow of an alligator, but the steady, mechanical whine of tires on pavement. Highway 41, the Tamiami Trail. Elena forced herself up. Her legs felt like lead pipes filled with sand. She scrambled up the embankment, the sawgrass slicing at her forearms, until her boots hit the rumble strip. The world suddenly expanded. The claustrophobic green tunnel of the swamp vanished, replaced by the endless, flat horizon of the glades stretching out under the pre-dawn light. Headlights appeared in the distance, twin stars cutting through the mist. Elena didn't wave frantically. She didn't scream. She simply stepped into the breakdown lane and held up the waterproof tactical case she had stolen from Thorne's private server room. It was a small, black rectangle, heavy with the weight of ruined lives and stolen souls. The vehicle slowed, tires crunching on the gravel. It wasn't a random trucker. It was a matte black government SUV, nondescript and imposing. The window rolled down. The air conditioning that blasted out hit Elena's face like a physical blow, shocking in its cold sterility. Vance, the man behind the wheel, was older than his dossier photo. Agent David Miller of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had the weary, etched face of a man who had seen too many carcasses and not enough convictions. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned her from the bloody hairline to the mud-caked boots. "Tell me you have it," Miller said, his voice gravel over velvet. Elena leaned against the doorframe, her strength finally failing. She passed the drive through the window. The ghost ledger, every buyer, every transaction, and the geolocation data for the containment units. Miller took the drive. He didn't smile. Miller slotted the drive into a dash-mounted reader. A moment later, a green light pulsed. "Encryption key?" he asked. "Pantera Elena whispered. "The password is Panthera." Miller typed it in. He watched the screen for 3 seconds, his jaw tightening. Then, he keyed his radio. "All units, this is Miller. The package is secured. The ledger is open. Initiate Operation Iron Jungle. I repeat, initiate Iron Jungle. Go, go, go." The convoy moved like a viper striking through the grass, swift, silent, and deadly. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Miller's SUV, a thermal blanket draped over her shoulders, clutching a bottle of water. They were moving back the way she had come, but this time they were the predators. Behind them, a column of 12 vehicles followed. SWAT tactical teams, federal wildlife officers, and 3 large transport trucks bearing the logos of the Pat Quinn Sanctuary and the Miami Zoo. "You didn't have to come back," Miller said, his eyes fixed on the road. The sun was breaching the horizon now, painting the sawgrass in violent shades of orange and gold. "I need to see it," Elena said, staring out at the blur of the swamp. "I spent 6 months inside that house. I need to see him in cuffs, Miller. I need to know the cage is actually closed." Miller nodded once. "Thorne is politically connected. You know that." "Not anymore." Elena tapped the dashboard where the drive Saturday. "That drive doesn't just have animal trafficking data. It has the blackmail folders." Miller's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Then today is going to be a very good day." They turned off the main highway onto the hidden access road. The approach to the Thorne estate was designed to intimidate. The crushed shell driveway wound for 2 miles leading to the sprawling, plantation-style mansion that rose from the wetlands like a white marble tumor. The convoy burst through the wrought iron gates, the lead truck smashing the lock mechanism with a spray of sparks. The illusion of the gilded cage shattered instantly. Agents poured out of the vehicles. Federal agents. "Get on the ground. Now." Elena watched from the safety of the SUV as the security detail froze. "Stay here," Miller said, unholstering his sidearm. "No," Elena said, opening her door. "He'll be in the West Wing. The solarium. He watches the sunrise there." Miller hesitated, then gestured for her to stay behind him. They moved toward the house. They reached the double doors of the solarium. Miller stacked up on the left, the tactical team on the right. Miller nodded. They kicked the door in. Marcus Thorne was exactly where Elena knew he would be. He was sitting in a high-backed, wrought-tan chair, wearing a silk dressing gown, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. The room was glass-walled on 3 sides, offering a panoramic view of the sun burning the mist off his private kingdom. Thorne didn't jump. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply took a sip of his drink and turned his chair slowly to face the intruders. "Agent Miller," Thorne said, his voice smooth, cultivated, and utterly devoid of fear. "You're trespassing. Marcus Thorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking in endangered species, money laundering, and racketeering," Miller barked, advancing into the room, weapon leveled. "Hands where I can see them." Thorne chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Trafficking? I am a conservationist, agent." Then, his eyes shifted past Miller. They landed on Elena. For the first time, the mask slipped. The arrogance cracked, revealing a flash of pure, reptilian malice. "Elena," he said softly, "my bright, ambitious archivist. I wondered why the coffee tasted bitter this morning. You didn't make it." Elena stepped out from behind Miller. She felt a phantom tremble in her hands, but clenched them into fists to hide it. "It's over, Marcus. The ledger is gone." Thorne's gaze dropped to her muddy boots, then back to her face. He sneered. "You think you've won?" "They aren't a collection," Elena said, her voice gaining strength. "They are living things, and they aren't yours anymore." Miller moved in. "Stand up. Now." Thorne stood, draining the last of his scotch. He held out his wrists. "Do your worst, Miller. I'll be out on bail by noon." "Not this time," Miller said, snapping the cuffs on tight. "We found a freezer in the basement, Thorne. The tiger cubs you processed? No bite. No deals." Thorne stiffened. For the first time, the color drained from his face. The conservationist facade evaporated, leaving only a butcher in a silk robe. As the agents hauled him out, he twisted his head back to look at Elena. "You'll never be safe, Vance. You know who my clients are." "I do," Elena said, holding his gaze until he was dragged through the doors. "And now, the whole world knows too." The arrest was only the beginning. The true work, the heartbreaking, redemptive work, happened outside. Elena walked out of the mansion and into the humid morning air. She made her way toward Zone 4, the heart of the darkness, where Thorne kept the class of predators. A team of vets from the Miami Zoo was already there, cutting through the heavy padlocks on a reinforced steel enclosure. Elena approached the cage. Inside, pacing in tight, neurotic figure eights, was the ghost tiger. It was a genetic anomaly, a leucistic Bengal tiger, its fur a pale, ghostly cream, stripped of the usual orange, its eyes a piercing, unnatural blue. The tiger paused as the light flooded the enclosure. It chuffed, a low sound that vibrated in Elena's chest. Dr. Eris Thorne looked up. "He's underweight," she murmured. "Can you move him?" Elena asked. "We have a transport truck ready. He's going to the sanctuary in Tampa." Elena watched as they prepped the dart gun. She didn't look away. When the dart struck the tiger's flank, the great cat roared before slowly sinking to the concrete floor. It wasn't death. It was the deepest sleep the animal had likely had in years. As they loaded the tiger onto the stretcher, Elena wandered through the rest of the compound. It was a montage of liberation. To her left, agents were carefully carrying out crates containing hyacinth macaws. Their feathers were a brilliant electric blue. Elena stopped at a small, unassuming shed. Inside, stacked in wire cages, were the pangolins. Dozens of them. They were curled into tight, armored balls, terrified. Agent Miller appeared beside her. He had holstered his weapon. "We counted 40, Miller said softly. "Most of them are alive. We caught the buyer's jet on the tarmac in Teterboro an hour ago." Elena reached out, touching the wire mesh of the nearest cage. Thorne called them walking pine cones. "Thorne is currently being processed at federal detention," Miller said. "And the drives you gave us. Elena, you've given us a map of the entire black market trade on the East Coast. This is state? It's going to be seized. What happens to it?" Miller looked around. "State wants to bulldoze the structures. Return the land to the Everglades Restoration Project. In 2 years, this will all be sawgrass and water." Elena looked out toward the tree line. "It happened," she said. "We can't forget that it happened." By noon, the heavy transports were rolling out, one by one, carrying their precious cargo towards sanctuaries. Elena sat on the hood of a medical truck, a paramedic finally tending to the gash on her head. She watched the last truck rumble down the driveway. It carried the ghost tiger. Miller walked over, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. He handed one to her. "So," Miller said, "the U.S. attorney wants to debrief you. Protective custody is on the table." Elena took the coffee. She looked at her hands. They were still stained with the mud of the swamp. "I don't want to hide," she said. "I spent 6 months hiding in plain sight. I'm more than a witness. I know how the money moves. I know the codes." She looked Miller in the eye. "You said you're opening a task force?" Miller smiled, a slow, genuine expression. "Operation Iron Jungle is just the start. We could use a consultant." Elena turned to look at the mansion one last time. It looked small now, pathetic. Beyond the house, the Everglades waited. The river of grass waved in the wind. "I'm not going back to New York," Elena said. "Good," Miller replied, "because we have a lot of work to do." Elena took a breath. It smelled wild. It smelled free. "Let's go," she said. She climbed into the SUV, leaving the gilded cage behind her. She looked forward to the highway and to the fight that was just beginning.